And our next speaker that I have the honor to introduce to you as well is also an expert in this field. Actually, she just returned from Iraq this week, having had several days there in the cities and villages of the Nineveh plain. But it's not the topic she will address today, because she's an expert on many organizations that are at the forefront of persecuting Christians. And it is my honor to welcome Ms. Ewelina Ochab, who serves as a legal counsel in Vienna, Austria for ADF International. She promotes religious freedom, but also sanctity of life, family and marriage, especially by supporting our offices and our team members in our Brussels office for the European Union, in Strasbourg for the Council of Europe, and our team at the United Nations in Geneva and New York. Prior to joining ADF International, Ms. Ochab worked as legal executive for Osborne Solicitors in London, England. She obtained a LLB with honors in 2011 at the University of Kent, where she's also currently completing her PhD in international law and medical ethics. She has a certificate in law from the German-Polish Law School of Humboldt University in Berlin, Germany, graduating there in 2008. She also holds a certificate in law, war, and human rights from the London School of Economics. Ochab graduated from the ADF Leadership Development Program to become a Blackstone Fellow in 2012. She's fluent in Polish, German, and basic Russian. You see a lot of credentials there, but what qualifies her the most to speak and address us today is her passion about this topic of persecuted Christians and of religious freedom throughout the world. So please join me in warmly welcoming Ms. Ewelina Ochab.
Despite the fact that over the last months I've been working a lot on the topic of genocide in the Middle East, and I'm just back from Iraq, today I'll be addressing you on the topic of Nigeria and the situation in Nigeria, because of course the situation in Nigeria is also critical. And Christians in Nigeria have been persecuted for many, many years. However, the desperate situation in Nigeria gained wide publicity first around 2014, after the terrorist group Boko Haram kidnapped girls from a secondary school in Chibok, in Borno State. And this event also sparked an international campaign, Bring Back Our Girls. And of course, this campaign gained a lot of international attention. However, today, 2 years later, the situation remains critical in Nigeria. So what happened in 2014? On 14th April 2014, Boko Haram kidnapped 276 girls between 16 and 18 years of age from a secondary school in Chibok, Borno State. And it is reported that some of the girls were sold into slavery, they were abused, they were also displaced to different regions, like for example Cameroon, where they were also involved in suicide attacks. Some of the girls were also presented to some of the Boko Haram fighters as a prize for the service. And of course, non-Muslim girls were also forced into conversion. Some of the girls managed to escape. However, today there are still 196 girls that remain in the hands of Boko Haram. And of course, this is just one of the events from 2014, but there were many more. And today I'll be talking about some of the atrocities committed by Boko Haram, but also by another group called Fulani militia, Fulani Herdsmen. However, before I will explain what's happening in Nigeria and especially present the situation as perpetrated by those two groups, I just wanted to emphasize the situation in Nigeria in general, explain why Nigeria is so different from other countries where Christians are being persecuted. It is important to emphasize that Christians are not a minority in Nigeria. There are over 89 million of Christians in Nigeria. It means that half of the population are actually Christians. So of course Christians cannot be perceived as minority that as in other countries is persecuted because of their faith. However, there are other problems in Nigeria. Christians populate mostly the southern states. The north is Muslim, and Christians are minorities in the north part of Nigeria. And also the middle belt, the yellow few states marked on the map. There are many Christians over there, but the persecution is very severe. And of course, we have the problem of Boko Haram in northern states, unfortunately expanding also to different countries like Niger, Chad, Cameroon. And the problem in the Middle East is mostly because of Fulani herdsmen, but I'll explain that in more details in a moment. So, as already mentioned, the main problem and the main challenges faced by Christians in Nigeria is because of terrorism, Islamic terrorism. And because of terrorism, in 2015, Nigeria was ranked as the third country most affected by terrorism in the world. And this is mostly because of the attacks of Boko Haram. So, what is Boko Haram? Boko Haram is a Salafi jihadi Muslim group that emerged in 2003. And we mostly heard about Boko Haram around 2014. That's when the situation became so critical that it gained wider publicity. Boko Haram is based in northeastern Nigeria, but is also active in Niger, Chad, Cameroon. And despite the fact that Boko Haram became famous because of kidnapping the 276 girls from Chibok, they were not the only victims of Boko Haram, of course. And it is reported that the numbers of kidnapped girls and women by Boko Haram is in thousands. What is also neglected in the media or omitted from the media is that the attacks of Boko Haram are not random, and they are often directed against Christians. Boko Haram specifically targets Christians as non-believers. But Boko Haram also attacks politicians or Islamic leaders that do not agree with their policy. And the crimes committed by Boko Haram are widespread, both geographically and as far as the magnitude of the crimes is concerned. And the exact numbers of the killed or persecuted is unfortunately not known. In 2014, it was Boko Haram that was called the deadliest terrorist organization in the world, not Daesh, not ISIS, but Boko Haram. And in 2015, the number of the atrocities slightly decreased, and Boko Haram became the second deadliest terrorist organization, having conducted over 491 attacks, causing death of over 5,478 people and injuring over 3,000 people. As it was not enough, in 2015, Boko Haram also confirmed their support to Daesh. And it can be also noted that the policy of Boko Haram is to some extent similar to the policy of Daesh, and some of the tactics are similar. And one of the tactics is that, for example, Boko Haram, similarly as Daesh, aims to establish so-called caliphate in the regions that they reside. And it has been reported that occasionally Boko Haram would also allow Christians to convert or to be killed, very similar tactic used by, or policy used by Daesh in the Middle East. However, the main difference is that, of course, Boko Haram has not gained the same international support as Daesh. Even Boko Haram has some support from African countries. There are some foreign fighters, however, still not as in the case of Daesh. In 2015, the annual revenue of Boko Haram was at $25 million US. And that's principally from kidnappings, for ransom and extortion, and other financing activities, like, for example, bank robberies, illegal mining, external donations, and drugs. But still, Boko Haram does not have the same sophisticated financing structure as Daesh. But the second group that is normally doesn't get almost any traction in the media is actually the Fulani herdsmen. The Fulani herdsmen, also called Fulani militia, is a semi-nomadic pastoralist ethnic group living mostly in the central part of Nigeria, the so-called Middle Belt. And the majority of the Fulani herdsmen are Muslim, and sometimes I'll be referring to them as the Muslim Fulani herdsmen. And the Muslim Fulani herdsmen, they've been clashing with indigenous tribes and local, mainly Christian, farmers of a grazing land for many years. And the clashes intensified around the 2011 election and then 2015 election in Nigeria. And because of the systematic nature of the recent attacks and targeting of Christians, it has been reported that the Muslim Fulani herdsmen aim dominance over the territories and properties, ultimately eliminating the presence of Christians in the Middle Belt area of Nigeria. And for example, the year 2014 was marked by a rapid increase of atrocities committed by the Muslim Fulani herdsmen, especially in the Middle Belt area, but also beyond. And in that year, in 2014, the Muslim Fulani herdsmen were responsible for over 154 incidents of violence, resulting in at least 1,229 fatalities. And consequently, because of all the atrocities in 2014, the Muslim Fulani herdsmen were called the fourth deadliest militant group in the world, despite the fact the media still does not report much of the atrocities. And in 2015, the number of attacks decreased slightly, but this is also mostly because of the new government that was very active in trying to stop terrorism in Nigeria. Of course, the atrocities committed by Boko Haram and Fulani herdsmen are not the only challenges faced by Christians in Nigeria. And there is a number of incidents of political violence and also state oppression. So Christians do have a very difficult life in Nigeria, despite the fact that they are not a minority. But what it is also important to note is that Nigeria is a signatory to the Rome Statute. So it means that Nigeria is under the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. What that means is that, of course, the International Criminal Court can investigate the atrocities committed in Nigeria, which is a massive difference from, for example, countries like Syria and Iraq, as mentioned by Jan Figel earlier. And in 2010, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court announced that she would open the preliminary examination into the situation in Nigeria. And that was, of course, a great step forward. However, unfortunately, not much has happened ever since, and we are now 6 years later. In 2013, the prosecutor indicated that definitely she will consider the atrocities committed by Boko Haram, as they may amount to crimes against humanity. And in 2015, in the report of the prosecutor to the ICC, she also indicated that there are at least 6 cases against the Boko Haram fighters, and also 2 cases against the Nigerian military. And the 2 cases of the Nigerian military are basically in relation to the atrocities committed by the Nigerian military in response to Boko Haram, including extrajudicial killings, torture in detention. Nonetheless, despite indicating that there are at least 6 cases against Boko Haram, nothing is moving. So right now, the preliminary examination is at the admissibility stage, and no decision has been made yet whether it will proceed anywhere. However, as I mentioned, there are 6 cases against Boko Haram, but still no case against the Fulani herdsmen. and despite the fact, as already explained, Fulani herdsmen are very active, especially in the Middle Belt. And they were the fourth deadliest terrorist group in the world, but still, their atrocities are not being investigated yet. So, of course, in relation to Nigeria, there are different challenges than in other countries. One of the main challenges is, of course, terrorism that is being investigated. However, it's not going anywhere. And just to conclude, as already mentioned, Christians are the most prosecuted terrorist group in the world. And around the world, there are different challenges faced, and especially in countries where Christians are minorities, like, for example, in Syria and Iraq. However, even in countries where Christians are not the minority, and even in countries that are under the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, there seems to be not much response to the atrocities perpetrated against Christians. Christians are still being forgotten, and the impunity continues, and we must act to stop this impunity, to ensure that the perpetrators are brought to justice. And this is the only way how we can ensure that people will be able to live up their faith. Thank you.